guys. Today we're going to talk about brand marketing, arguably the most important topic in growing a company. And I'm going to dive right in because I've had 4 cups of coffee and it's Saturday and I want to go hang out with my kids. So I'm just going to jump in. So, brand marketing. Let's start with a question, which is what makes a company valuable? And I talk to CEOs about this a lot. And and there are a lot of different answers to this question. But I get asked a lot, like, how are we eventually going to exit this company in an environment where there basically are no exits? What should we be doing? What should we be focused on to create exit value? And I've talked to a lot of people about this in our industry and not, and including my brother who does private equity and he buys and sells companies all day long and has been doing that for decades, very successfully. And he says, I asked him, do you try to engineer an exit? Do you think about that when you're building the company? And he said, no. Never, ever, ever. You build a great company and the exit will take care of itself. And they, of course, he's not building consumer companies. It's like logistics, railroads, transportation, things like that. So he's building a great company and he has a definition of what a great company looks like. And to me, that's a very Warren Buffett-y type approach where you're looking for things like repeat customers, the unit economics, the math of the business, that you have a definition and a blueprint of what a great company is, and that's what you're trying to build. And then I asked that same question to Andrew Rosen, who's someone I work with a lot and really always try to get an extra minute with him to ask him something random and learn from him. He's really the GOAT as far as I'm concerned in terms of building retail companies. He was the founder of Theory and really helped create the contemporary clothing category that so many of our clients are working in. And he's amazing. And I actually was just talking to him about this yesterday. And we work on a company of his called TWP that I'm totally obsessed with, and with Rag and Bone and some of his other companies. And I asked him, how are you thinking about growing these companies? Are you thinking about the exit, or what do you do in this environment to get an exit? And he was like, we never think about the exit. You just can't, and this is clear, this is a fact. There aren't any exits. They're so few and far between at this point. It's so hard to sell an apparel company or a beauty company at this point. That if you're going to exit, if you're going to try to engineer building the company towards an exit, it's just foolish. It's a foolish thing to do because the probability is very low. And so, it's just stupid, right? But he said, I try to just do the right thing. And what does he mean by the right thing? He means the right thing for the brand. And he said something very insightful and true, which is we were talking about a couple of companies in the space. And he said, there's really a big difference between a business and a brand. He was like, a lot of what I see people doing is that they're building a business. And the difference is that a brand is worth more than the revenue of the company, right? There's a halo around it that's worth more than the actual, revenue that the company is producing. And I think that that's right. And so, he tries to get things profitable as quickly as he can. He's really smart with his how he capitalizes the companies and the working capital flows of the companies in the books and all that. But he is also very, very focused on brands. So I really am in his camp. That's always what I say to CEOs and people that we're working with is I just think you've got to let the exit take care of itself. They're too few and far between. You cannot engineer for exit. That just doesn't exist. Have an idea of what a good company looks like and be hard on yourself to build that. Pay attention to cash flow and EBITDA and unit economics, but also really focus on the brand and meaning something to customers and driving loyalty. And I think you want this thing to crackle, that's what a good brand does. It crackles. It makes people sit up straighter. It affects them emotionally. It drives loyalty. And you really want to avoid the big trap right now. And I think that the sinking feeling that so many CEOs and teams have right now is, are we just buying transactions? And I think the answer in many cases is yes. I think many, many companies right now are just buying transactions and they're not building a world around their products that drives loyalty and fanaticism and commitment from the customer over years. And that's what builds value, right? So that has really been an obsession of mine over the past year and a half or so. And that we've started to build into the work at Chief Detective is, okay, we've got to figure out kicking ass with both legs. And we, on the one hand, we have to win. We have to win the transactions, right? And we have to win those at the best economics that we can. And that's on the social platforms, paid spend, blah, 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 right? We have to win that short-term game. We have to buy the transactions very successfully. But the other thing we have to be doing in parallel is building the brand, building customer commitment, building loyalty and emotion, and building a world around something, right? And I think that's most, CEOs who, founders who really are the good ones are passionate about what they're doing and they're building from their own hearts, from their own lives. And that really is ultimately their motive is an emotional motive to build a heritage brand. You hear founders say that a lot, and I believe them when they say that. And that's really my drive too, is let's build something that you can see from outer space and it's going to last a long time and that's going to make our customers, be able to point and arrow at the sun and step into a bigger version of themselves because of the world that we're painting for them, right? This aspirational vision that they can kind of step into. That to me is the noble, human work of building companies. And that's where I think value comes from. And it's the only thing that can be focused on, because trying to focus on getting an exit is, again, just foolish. So that's the big picture of brand, is that you're trying to build enterprise value. If you're just buying transactions, you're not going to have anything that's worth anything, right? The minute you sell it, or the minute you step away from it, it's going to disintegrate. And that, I think, is the cynicism in the M&A market right now. Is there, over the past 15 years, everything that's been bought, most of it just is disintegrated the minute it integrates into the acquiring company. And so people just, they don't believe it, that there's value. And I think, but the other problem is that consumers are cynical, and I think this is a function of the fact that there are so many brands coming at everybody at this point. I think we're at a really historical moment right now in business building, where there's almost no barrier to entry to building a company. Like anybody can pull together a supply chain and a Shopify site, and creators off of some, influencer marketplace, and press a button and get ads going on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever. The barriers to entry have just gone away. And so there's so many new entrants. And over the last several years, there has been so much investment capital poured into apparel and beauty, skincare, et cetera, that the markets are oversaturated. I think anybody competing in these markets would tell you there's got to be a thinning of the herd. The trees have to shake. There are too many companies. And I think as a consumer, the other dynamic here is that on Meta, which of course is Facebook and Instagram, which is where most companies, that's the bulk of their customer acquisition is happening on Meta. That if you look at Meta's earning reports over the last several quarters, they're growing their revenue. That's like it's an extraordinarily, you know, profitable and high growth company, even, you know, over a decade in, it's mature as a company. Its user base doesn't grow, but its revenue grows like 20% year over year. How are they doing that? It should have slowed down by now. And they're not increasing prices, by the way. CPMs globally have not come up. If you're experiencing high CPMs and high pricing on your ads, that's probably something unique to you. That is not happening globally. And look at your creative, by the way. But you know, so how do they keep growing? It's because they're adding inventory, which means we're sitting here, okay, one organic post, oh, ad. We're just getting slammed with ads, right? There are more ads in the newsfeed and in every crevice and corner of user experiences on Meta. And they're also making really dramatic changes to the way that they drive content into us. They're moving more towards TikTok in the way that they do that. So I think the result is that with all these new brands, all these dupe brands, things popping up overnight, all these creators coming at us with doing stuff in their bathroom, and like all this inventory in the feed, that consumers are fatigued and they don't trust, right? There isn't like native trust around brands. I was like, And what we're seeing in Chief Detective is, even when we put a logo on something, or when we do some storytelling, or we're really obsessed with like multi-touch marketing right now, we've got to have warmth and familiarity. We can't just come at them with cold acquisition. We're finding that helps performance. And I think that that's very new, very, very new. It didn't used to matter at all. But now what we're seeing is that when customers are aware of a brand, when we've built up trust with them, when we do things in the ads that try to show like credibility, and something that's been around for a minute, it converts better, and I think that it's becoming this huge conversion trigger is brand, right? And that is very new for social marketing. So that's why, I've just gotten obsessed with this over the course of the last year or so, is because it is new. It's new. In my world, it's new. And so I want to explain to you, I think that brand, if you are not focused on brand this year, I think you ought to go back to the drawing board on your strategic plan and really think about, we ought to be prioritizing brand. I think if you're experiencing a slowdown, if you're having trouble scaling, if your repeat purchase rate is not as strong as you want, if your internal team is having debates over strategy and direction and product assortment and things like that, and again, if you have that sinking feeling that you're just buying transactions and not building enterprise value, all of the above, I think you want to go back to brand. So, I think I truly think for both like scaling your company, for getting better performance metrics, and for building enterprise value, this is the topic. And so I want to explain to you, I've been knee deep in this with Goop and with a few other clients. Really, basically, most of 2024, this was my number one focus, was building out our brand playbook for Chief Detective and applying our same organizing principles in terms of the power of small scale tests. How do we use Meta, our fruit fly, testing engine, our customer voting engine? How do we apply that to figuring out brand? And I've really tried to educate myself and experiment. And I think that we've come up with a pretty killer playbook. And so that's what I want to share with you today. So I'm going to share my screen and walk through the deck that we use at Chief Detective to orient people to this. We are running a wait list right now for doing this work with clients at Chief Detective. And so, I probably won't be able to get to work with you directly on this, but here's what we're doing. All right, first, let me talk about how I think about brand kind of just overall, right? What is brand? It is a perception, right? If I ask 10 people what they think about your company, or this is a good one, describe your company as a person, they'd probably all say something different, right? Or they wouldn't know what to say at all. And that's because you haven't created that perception with them, right? Brand is a perception. And I think you want to understand very clearly, what perception do we want to create? And then you have tactics, marketing tactics that go create that perception. So it's perception building. And then of course there's reach, right? How many people are aware of your brand in the first place, right? And that, to me, those are the two big levers that we're playing with when we're trying to build brand at Chief Detective. Is first, let's understand what perception we want to create and the world that we want to build here. And then second, let's decide how we're going to do that. Right. So, but the other cool thing about brand that I'm totally obsessed with is that it's an internal perception too for your team. Right. And I think when you get brand right, it activates your customer and it drives preference in the marketplace, that if they're going to choose product A or product B, they choose your product because of the brand and the perception that you've created. But it also activates you as a team, right? That you're so filled up by it, that you drive forward aggressively with passion and with instinct, instead of just like overthinking everything and debating. You guys all just know what to do, right? That you're crackling with your own brand. And I think there's just a really amazing example of that, which is Apple and their Think Different campaign from the 90s, which I'm going to go through in a second. But I do think, when you get brand right, you drive preference in the marketplace, you drive better metrics for yourself because your conversion is going to happen more readily, your loyalty is going to be higher. You differentiate yourself towards the alternatives. That's the heart of it, is, again, product A, product B. Why are we different, and why are we better? It's differentiation, right? It activates your customer, it activates you as a team. That very, very importantly, I think that when you get brand right, it makes everything obvious, right? And so many times when we go into companies, they've got paid spend going there. Okay, we're spending money on Meta, but they're not really, maybe they're sending some catalogs, right? But they're not doing much else. They aren't really sure what's the right like events, calendar for them. What should their collaborations and partnerships be? What types of influencers and creators, what profiling should we have for recruiting influencers and creators to represent our brand? Should we have celebrity avatars as partners? Should we develop some kind of content franchise? I feel like very often that a company is able to turn on spend, but they don't know what else to do for their marketing. And to me, the culprit behind that is an insufficient definition of their brand. I think that when you define brand correctly, you're going to be thinking of things in the shower. Your whole team, your heads are just going to be overflowing with all the things that you could do to then express that, right? So when you get brand right, it makes marketing obvious. And that, God, what a gift that is, right? And lastly, guys, I think that ultimately your goal with brand and with your company is to create something that cannot be competed with. And that is a very hardcore goal that I think you should try to attain. Let's create something that cannot be competed with. What does that mean? It means in this very saturated market that you've created something that is defensible, that your customers aren't just going to sit there and scroll on Instagram and try every little new product that pops up that's an alternative to yours, but you've got them, right? Something that cannot be competed with. So that's what I think a good brand does. And the reality is, I've seen so many brand decks over the years, zillions of brand decks over the years. And that's usually the first stop when somebody is building a company, they go to an agency or they do this in-house and they create their brand equities deck. And I think that those do a great job defining visuals. That's usually when I look at those, I'm like, they've nailed it visually. Like this really very clear what their graphics should look like, et cetera. Maybe even what their tone of voice should be in their copywriting. But I never ever look at those decks and instantly know what to do with their marketing program. Never, ever, ever, ever. Right. And I think that that's a failure. And it may not be a failure of the agency that did it. It might just be a failure in setting scope, so I think that's very important that when you go out to do this exercise, your goal is to make marketing obvious, to give yourselves a charter to operate towards, to really outline something that can't be competed with, your offering so clearly and your why and your mission and your vision that you're just able to wind up your team and go, right? So I think that that's the first step is set the scope for your brand exercise in a way that you're really going to come out of this with a charter for your company, right? And do this exercise in a way that you're hard on yourself and that's what you end up with. So long story short, I think everybody goes through some kind of brand definition exercise, but I think very few companies get it right. And that's what I want to explain today. And that's really what I've pushed to do with the work that I've done on brand in the last year and within Chief Detective as we framework it into process. How do we build a process to get to the right answer that drives the actions of this company, right? So everybody goes through some version of this exercise, right? You come up with like all these adjectives about yourself. Who are we? What are the themes? What are we offering? What's our service? What's our customer? Like you go through all these kind of brainstormy things and you end up with this big whiteboard of adjectives, right? And themes. Why are we different than our competitors? And then you start to group those, and some of the common groups are the why. Like, so any adjective that relates to why, our mission vision goes into the why bucket, right? Any adjective that relates to what we offer customer goes into the what bucket. Any offering that relates to who we are, like our personality traits, goes into the personality bucket, et cetera. And then you bucket these things out into brand pillars, and then you kind of squeeze that juice into a mission vision statement and your brand pillars, and then you sit and brainstorm marketing activities around those, right? So most companies go through something like this. I just don't think they get to the right answer. And so why is that? Why don't they get to the right answer? And I think one, because it's very hard to get to the right answer. I think they don't push, you got to get all the way to the bottom of it, right? And I think that it's a very spiritual exercise and that companies often do this by committee, which I think can be disastrous. I think it's got to come out of somebody's heart. I think hopefully the founder really, really knows what they're after and can articulate it and really drive this process. But look, for this to really work, I think you've got to get to the purpose, right? I'm a big believer in purpose. I believe it in life. I believe it in brands. You can feel it. You can smell it. Purpose, right? That's what you're going to try to transmit out to people and move them with, right? Is your why. Why do we wake up every day and do this? It's the river running underneath the brand. And if you don't get at that and articulate it, then you haven't gone far enough, right? So when I see these brand equities decks, I see a lot of personality descriptors and things like that, and I see a why statement, but it's often so abstract and written in like marketing language. And I'm just like, it doesn't move me. Not a single flutter in my heart from that why statement. And so if it doesn't move me, it probably doesn't move them and it probably doesn't move their customers. So I really think you got to push. One of my favorite sayings is that purpose whispers, purpose whispers. That's true with brand as well. You're trying to grab at something that's wispy and smoky and it scoots out of your hand the minute you try to grab it. It's a wrestling match. It's a soulful, spiritual wrestling match. What are we about, right? Purpose whispers. So that I think that you've got to really sign up for this. We're going to redo this brand exercise. We're going to do it the right way. We're going all the way to the bottom. We're going to grab purpose, bring it into matter, and articulate it tangibly in a way that the business can execute on it, right? That's the sort of underlying goal, right? Get to the bottom of it. And I think that the greatest case study of all time, probably, the most successful brand repositioning of all time, like in the history of business ever, was Apple in the 90s. And I think this is really worth digging deep on. I'm kind of late to the party on realizing what a genius Steve Jobs was, and now I'm obsessed with the guy and have tried to watch everything I can and read everything I can. But basically, let me summarize what happened. So in the 90s, like mid 90s, Microsoft was killing Apple. They had successfully they had owned the conversation and framed the conversation in the marketplace for personal computing around technology, right? And if you were, using computers in the 90s, you'll recall that Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, they had the best app ecosystem, whereas Microsoft had numbers. They had all these, or sorry, Mac had numbers. They had all these really shitty apps. Microsoft had this great, really robust operating system. Macs really didn't, and Microsoft technology and app ecosystem was way stronger. And they made the marketing conversation around that because that was their relative strength against Apple, and they pounded it, and they were winning by miles, right? Apple at the time was not being run by Steve Jobs. He had been kicked out of the company, and there was this total like just tactician running it, and trying to compete on a feature basis against Microsoft, on in within the conversation of technology, and getting clobbered because Mac couldn't hold a candle to them. So, long story short, Steve Jobs gets brought back in. That guy gets fired. Steve Jobs takes a look around, and he's like, okay, we need to win the battle of perception, right? That's a battle of brand. And his first instinct was, we need to do a brand marketing campaign. What's a brand campaign? Well, the way he describes it is, I can't describe it any better, is that like when you look at a Nike ad, all they do is brand advertising Nike. They're never talking about features. Then, as he says, like they're never saying our soul is better than Reebok's. They never go to that level. They're celebrating athletes and great athletics, and that's what they do. They're building a world, an aspirational world around their product. And that's what a brand campaign does. It doesn't talk about features, right? Or price or anything like that. It's making an emotional connection, with the customer, and building a world around their brand and their product. And so Steve Jobs looked at this and said, okay, we're getting clobbered. They're building the conversation around something that isn't our strength. We need to bring the conversation to something that is our strength. And we need to build a world around our product and change perception. So he brought Chiat Day back in, which is like, the legendary ad agency, that had done Apple's first kind of brand campaign, which was that 1984 ad, that Orwellian TV ad that's considered, one of the greatest television ads of all time. And so he brought them back in, and they brainstormed and really give Chiat Day an A plus 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 on this, because they came up with all of this. And it's really super interesting to read their process. It was very inspiring to me. And I hope I get to meet some of those people at some point. That would be really cool to talk to them about it live. It's just so, so cool. But anyway, what they did, as he says, the world is a saturated, noisy place. We can only expect people to remember one thing about us, right? And so we better know what that one thing is. We have to know what the soul of this company is. What is our one core value that we want everybody to know about Apple, right? And that's what they're going to build the conversation around. And so Chiat Day drilled that down to the core value of an I believe statement. A core value is often a we believe, right? So they believe that passionate people can change the world, and that the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who actually do, right? Chiat Day came up with that. And then they constructed a whole brand campaign, TV ads and print ads, to transmit that out to the world, right? And to make people feel differently when they used a Mac versus a PC, right? And it's really cool that their jumping off point for that was actually just research. They sat around thinking and brainstorming on what makes Mac different. What's a strength that we have that Microsoft doesn't have that we can build on and bring the conversation over to us. And what they realized in their research was that people like Steven Spielberg were using Apples. Even though Microsoft was like the technology winner, the creative people in the world were using Apples, and we're using Macs. And so they thought, okay, that's what we're going to build on. That's our advantage in the marketplace. We're creative, right? So let's build this beautiful vision, and as Steve Jobs says, in a different video, that the opportunity you have with a brand is to ratchet up our species, and that is right. And the way I think of that is about like personalities that we build around apparel brands and things like that. When you build the personality so clearly and so aspirationally, and again, you give our customers something to shoot their arrow at, right? Something better, a better, cooler, more empowered, more chic, whatever version of themselves to step into. You've kind of like done humanity a favor. It's just such an honor as a brand to be able to do that. Ratchet up our species. Let's build a personality in a world that is so clear and compelling and emotionally infused and moving, and it connects with people at such an emotional level that it makes them sit up straighter and gives them a vision to step into, right? And that's what Apple did. They ratcheted up our species, and the cool thing, there's so many cool things about this campaign. One is that their stock price tripled like almost immediately. The minute they built this world around themselves and changed perception, the whole company became more valuable. And but the coolest thing, back to my original point, is that it activated them, right? It gave them this North Star as a company that they didn't have to talk about it, just instinctively marched toward. And a year after I think that campaign launched, they launched the iMac, which I had one of those in 1997. It was that big monitor with the colored back, innovative and new and different and creative and a different take on personal computing. And it made you feel creative. It was visionary. And then after that was the iPod, the Nano, the iPhone. It kicked off this path of innovation for them. And when they got their hands around the soul of their own company, which is that passionate people can change the world, they passionately changed the world. That's what happened. And guess what? They now, of course, everybody knows, are the most valuable company in the world, right? So I think that you just can't argue with this. It probably is the most successful brand repositioning campaign in the history of business, and there's a lot to be learned from it. And so I really, really recommend you stop and study this, because you have this potential building a company. Everybody does. Do you have the ability to do it? We'll see. Again, do this exercise, get to the bottom of it, right? But that's what the potential is with brand. The most valuable company in the world because of that brand campaign. So my takeaway is from watching this and studying this case study, and it was interesting because when I sort of clued into this and started to kind of deep dive on it, I was knee deep in working on the Goop brand with the team over there. Um, and I thought that we were done. We had done this incredible like architecture work and we're really fired up about it. And but I realized after watching all this Apple stuff that we weren't quite done, right? Because what we had done is come up with all the storylines and but we hadn't drilled it down to the one thing. And so that's something I instantly added into core process is we've got at the bottom, we got to take it all the way to the bottom, and the bottom is that one thing. And I think companies debate this all the time, which is, do we need a tagline? And my feeling on that is yes, you need a tagline. And you don't need to use it externally, but I think you do need to use it as a forcing function to drag yourself all the way to the bottom of this lake. That we need to drill this down to the one thing. That's the purpose whispers. You've got to grab it. That's the thing you've got to get to, right? It's the prize at the bottom of the pond. So all your brand work, all your storylines, et cetera, the final step of that is drill it down to the soul, right? What is our one core value? What's our belief statement? What's the world that we're creating? What's going to be, the linchpin of this whole brand world that we're going to create? And let's make sure we can articulate that clearly and crisply and in a way that lifts us up and lifts our customer up, right? So that was my first takeaway is like, okay, the end point of this brand exercise actually is to drill it down to a tagline, right? And the one thing. And then my second takeaway, I'd been sort of chewing on this all summer and like was thinking, okay, what in terms of activating the brand and creating this perception. So we know what perception we want to create. Now, what are we going to do in terms of marketing to go create that perception? And when I drilled down on this Apple stuff, it made me realize, okay, the starting point for creating this is a brand campaign. And anything that we touch with Chief Detective, that's going to be our first move after really drilling down to the brand architecture. And the one thing is we're going to launch a brand campaign, and we're not going to sell products. We're not going to sell features. We're going to sell the world, the emotion. We're going to create that customer connection. So it gave me like the starting point, I think, for just trying to activate a brand is, okay, let's do a brand campaign. And then we're going to do all this other marketing stuff. And I'll share some of my thoughts on what the other just obvious tent poles of like pushing the comet through of brand perception. But start with a brand campaign. The next takeaway was just the power of letting this activate you as a team, right? And the importance of creating ownership on the team and selling it to the team, right? The video that's out there of Steve Jobs is him presenting it to his team. And he's so excited. He's crackling, he's excited. He himself is animated by it. And he animates his team with his own charisma and vision. And so do not underestimate the importance of selling this vision to your own team getting them involved in it, giving them ownership, and letting this animate be the fire that lifts up the hot air balloon of what you guys do. And this I'm just obsessed with because this is just me. I've been obsessed with religion since I was a child, and I just am a total purpose hawk in every possible way. But so watching Steve Jobs and understanding this further was very vindicating for me because this is just how I naturally operate. And this is a really good proof point of, I think, the power of it and the importance of it, and that this isn't Pollyanna, but this is actually a competitive advantage, is that, he says this incredible line in like this other random video. He says that, there's a thing in humanity, there's a thing in human nature. It's the instinct and the part of us that makes somebody want to be a poet and not a banker. And that instinct, that part of us, that part of humanity is where you have to build product from. So if you think about Apple, he was obsessed really from like college forward. It wasn't just part of this Think Different. He was always obsessed with this font, the kerning, the space between letters, the packaging, like that really was him. He had a romantic, religious view of product creation and what you transmit to people when they touch and receive your product, and that is a form of poetry. And that's right. I passionately agree with that great companies, heritage brands, they come from this fire in you, the side of your nature that makes you want to draw and paint and play an instrument and, write poetry. It's that side of human nature that great product comes from. But guess what? That's also the side that great brand comes from, right? So I believe that brand needs to come from soul and poetry. And that again, we really do have a chance to ratchet up our species, that there's a romantic vision here, and to me, ultimately, Steve Jobs and Apple are proof that you can drive from that side of human nature, that innocent, archaic, romantic side of ourselves, passion and poetry, and still be a relentless, competitive business animal, animal. And that intersection, I think, if you're able to live on that intersection as a company, is the most valuable intersection of all, right? And so I don't think trying to do this exercise out of the poetic side of yourselves like negates that, you're going to turn around and you're going to attack it with relentless competitive energy, with a mindset of domination to dominate your category. So you're bringing those two things together. And back to where we started this video, what creates a valuable company? I think if you do that, you've got a valuable company. So anyway, that's the Steve Jobs case study. Go watch it, read about it, obsess over it. It's super inspiring and instructive. Okay, so now I want to explain how I've sort of adapted this into Chief Detective and into how to do a brand exercise in a way that's actionable, that doesn't just end up being this brand equities deck that informs your graphics and then nobody ever looks at it again, right? But an actual playbook and charter, and point of like deep fire inspiration for your company. Something that actually translates to actions, to marketing, and to enterprise value. So this is what I've come up with. I'm sure this will evolve into infinity, but this is proving to be effective at Chief Detective, and also pretty quick. I don't believe in taking 6 months to do something like this. I think you can do this in a matter of weeks. And in fact, I have to say that in the betas that we've done this with so far, two of them, and we haven't done that many of them. So a large, like percentage of them have been in the context of a beauty brand going into Sephora. And because when that happens, you've got your shot at greatness at Sephora and scale, and you want to crush it, right? So brands, that's a big moment for brands, and they're sitting there thinking about what can we do 6 months ahead of us hitting the shelves at Sephora to make that an absolute blowout success, right? How are we going to pop out on the shelves? How are we going to educate the Sephora sales associates? What are we going to do on our own ads to drive traffic to that and demand for that? What's our packaging going to be? What's our shelf tag going to be, et cetera. So that often is a very kind of high pressure, time sensitive moment to try to get this kind of definitional stuff pulled together. So point being that I think this can be done very quickly, right? So there are three phases to this. One is research, right? You've got to really get your hands around your marketplace and yourselves in that marketplace, your own introspective, feelings and connection to what you're doing, your customers, et cetera. So phase one is research. And what you're looking for in the research process is adjectives and themes, differentiators, storylines, right? What are the storylines of our brand, right? Then you're going to organize them all. So you end up with all this stuff on a whiteboard or on a slide deck or whatever you work. And then you're going to start to organize those adjectives and themes and differentiators into buckets. And the buckets are your official storylines. They're the pillars of your brand, right? And and I will come back. I have sort of landed on what I think the best buckets are, like how to organize all these adjectives. So I'll share that and go through some slides on that. And so you build out your brand storylines, your mission, vision statement, your pillars, and then you're going to do a brainstorm about, okay, what are the 3 to 4 things to bring that we're going to do tactically um, to bring this thing to life. So that's like, your marketing program. What are we going to do? We know what perception we want to create. That's what you're doing in phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 3 is how are we going to do it? How are we going to get this out to the marketplace? And again, that's 2 kind of tracks. One is what do we do to show and create the understanding? How do we create the perception, right? The other thing is reach. How are we going to do that at a big enough scale that it's actually going to matter and drive growth in the business, right? So again, it's 3 phases: research, and then the brand architecture definition, and then activation and implementation. So the research phase, I think, is you've got 2 tracks within that. One is your kind of desk work, and the other is like your live interviews, right? Those are basically the 2 types of research, that you could do, I think. So starting with the live interviews, of course, you want to interview yourselves and anyone related to the product, formulators, and things like that. You want to interview your customers. You want to interview non-customers, people who should be customers and aren't. And so I would just sit and brainstorm, okay, like let's design our interview program. Who are we going to interview on what timeline? And then what's our script, right? And then let's go get it done. Right. And I think that actually is probably the most time consuming part because you're trying to get on people's calendars and, blah, blah, blah. But that, I think could take 4 to 5 weeks, honestly, from start to finish on your interviews could take 4 to 5 weeks. But in parallel, you're doing the desk work research, and that basically is just reading, watching, listening to everything that you can. So if you've got white papers, read those. If you have customer reviews, obviously pour through those. If you any PR hits that you've had and how you've been framed externally by other people, read through that. Like look at the signals on your business. What have been the top ads, top organic posts, top emails, and why, right? What were the worst ones and why? What are other competitors and peers in the category doing? How are they positioning themselves? What seem to be their 1 or 2 winning messages in their ads and on their site? How are we different, right? So again, back to the Apple thing. How are we different? Like what's Microsoft's weakness and what's our strength? Let's move the conversation to that, right? So you do all this research and you're kind of processed. It's like doing a term paper. I remember doing that in high school. I have all my index cards, my note cards, and then I've got to pull it all together and come up with, the storylines, right? So you're kind of processing this in real time as you're going, like you're just making notes. Okay, that seems to be a theme. Oh, that's interesting. That feels like that's a real strength of ours, right? Or et cetera. It's just going to start to occur to you, and you're going to kind of in real time start to organize your index cards. So step 1, research. And again, I think your research phase is probably going to take you 4 to 5 weeks. Then you're going to organize it. So let me explain. I kind of experimented with different buckets, and these are the ones that I've landed on. And again, they might change, but these have been pretty good to work with so far. So the first is why, right? And again, this is what's going to feed your mission vision statement. This is what's going to drill down to the one thing, the core value, the soul of your company. I feel like we end up with a few. You might have 2 to 3 why statements, and then you've got to kind of do the alchemy within that and figure out, okay, how does that melt down into one mission vision statement and to one, we believe that passionate people can change the world. You're going to drill this down into one, but I think just as part of your storylines, you could have 2 to 3 whys, right? And we might do like a deep dive on the Goop brand exercise and so if we do that, I'll link that in here and I'll go through the actual storylines of that and explain what we landed on for each of those. It'll be a really tangible example, but I'm under NDA with all of our clients and I can't reference them. So I'm going to keep referencing Apple because that's a public case study. So the why with Apple, of course, and again, an I believe statement, or what, why we wake up every morning. Their belief statement was we believe that passionate people can change the world. So this is, where you really try to get to the river underneath, go all the way to the bottom, get to the why, right? The next bucket of storylines is the what, and this is what your company does, right? And I will give an example from Goop because I think this is obvious is that they provide. So, for example, you might end up with five whats, right? Or you might end up with one what. We make chairs, like whatever you do, you dictate how many of these there are. In the case of the clients that I've been working with, there might end up being 3 to 5 of these, I would say. But it's this is your charter. When I was talking earlier about this is like what we do as a company. This is what we promise to the marketplace. This is what we promise to our customer. This to me really functions as a charter, and you always stay honest to it. I think that it's a really good exercise to go back and reread all of your storylines every year when you're doing your annual planning. So fourth quarter, you're doing annual planning for next year. Whenever you do that, look through this and say, okay, wait, are we delivering on that? Let's tighten the screws on how well we're delivering against what we're saying we're going to do as a company. So in the case of Goop, just to say one of the what's because it's very obvious and is that Goop delivers shortcuts and cheats, to people to help them. Well, I'll just leave it at that. So recipes, for example, or curation of products, the perfect dress to wear to a cocktail party because they've done the work to go look at all third-party apparel products and just filtered it down to the coolest stuff, right? There's product curation, there are recipes, travel guides, right? Where should I get my eyebrows done in LA? Like you can always count on Goop to get the right answer for that, right? So they provide all these shortcuts and cheats to great products and experiences, right? And so that's a good thing that they could look back on every year when they do their planning. Wait, are we delivering on that? Okay, let's make sure we're delivering on that. Or another example might be if you're an apparel company that let's say we make travel clothes, right? One of our what's is that we give women the most reliable travel wardrobes that they can wear to the museum, to dinner, to da 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 da. But let's say you audit this and you say, you know what, our return rate on our pants is really high, and our fits are inconsistent across our silhouettes. So you're failing, on that promise that you're making because if your fits are inconsistent, then a customer can't rely on you, right? And by the way, for anything that's over $300 or something like that, any kind of high price point thing, fit is really, really important to lifetime value, right? Because the woman who can afford that, there probably a huge percentage of that consumer is working. She's a working woman, and that means she has money and she doesn't have time. And so what you are trying to do with your fits is make something bankable. And that's a really big, important driver of lifetime value in a high price point apparel company is fit. You just cannot obsess over that enough. And so that's just a good example. If you're promising to your customer, one of your key what's is that we're going to be your most reliable, bankable source for travel pants, but your fits are all over the place, you're failing on that what, right? So that's what I mean. It's just a small example of like, go back and audit your what's every year and make sure you're delivering on it and drive this into your annual planning. Okay, so then the customer benefits is how the customer receives your what's, right? So if the what of Goop or one of the what's of Goop is, okay, we're going to give shortcuts and cheats, she's receiving it as saving time, right? So the customer benefit is she saves time and that she gets these aspirational quick unlocks into a higher version of herself because Goop has done the hard work of doing all the legwork to find the coolest products and restaurants, etc. So the customer benefits tend to be a mirror image of your what's. This is what we're giving the customer. This is how he or she is receiving it. But the cool thing about customer benefits and what I've found so far is that there's often an extra one. So if you have 5 what's, you're probably also going to have 5 benefits, but you might have 6. You might have a 6th one. This intangible thing that accrues from like sort of the exhaust tail of all the work that you're doing. She gets this other benefit. And so, for example, that benefit might be self-esteem, right? And it goes back to the thing of ratcheting up our species. That as a brand, if we deliver our what's and our personality and everything else in the right way, she might get this or he cooler version of themselves to step into, right? Something to point their arrow at. Let's all point our arrows at the sun, And so there might be a self-image benefit, self-esteem, something like intangible that's so beautiful. And that might end up being a really cool thing to build your brand around. So think about that. Okay, the next buckets for your storylines, brand personalities. So these are your personality traits. We're funny. We are effortlessly cool. We are whatever, right? You sit down and know yourself because again, the ratcheting up the species, when you define the personality, you might give your customer a cooler version of themselves to step into. And so I think the personality traits are really important. They touch a lot of the way that you express yourself. It touches your influencer casting, this touches a lot of things. So get this right. Don't be lazy about this. Really drill it down to something tangible that's unique. And this is another really guiding light that I love that I got from Peggy Noonan, who's someone who's writing I absolutely love. She's a political speechwriter who writes an op-ed for now she's kind of retired and is just sort of non-partisan commentator on politics in the world. And she writes with a lot of humanity and humor. I just love the way she writes. But anyway, I was reading one of her books about speechwriting, and she says that she has this amazing line in there. She's like, you never want to do what's expected. You want to do what's interesting and what's true. And I think that is a good mantra to keep in mind as you're doing this, is like, be different, like have courage while you're doing this. If like you want to be differentiated from other companies and brands, you don't want to copy. That's the opposite of a brand, right? Then you're just doing the same as someone else. Then you're not, then what are you, So really understand yourself. Remember, go all the way to the bottom. Do this intellectually rigorously, right? So what is your personality? Define, again, you might have 5, 6 personality traits. And those would go into the personality bucket. And then this is very important, your key objections, right? So when you talk to your non-customers, okay, you should be a customer, but you're not. Why, right? What you're really looking for are objections. You're too expensive. Price is like almost always an objection. Not, and you might build on that or not, it depends on what you're doing. But when there is a very significant objection in the marketplace, you probably see that as a problem, but I don't. I see that as a gift, because I know as a marketer that when there is a strong objection in the marketplace, it gives you your key marketing storyline. All you have to do is own the objection, flip it on its head, and that could be your marketing campaign right there. And the example I always use with this is Jake Paul, who you might know of. He is like an old YouTube influencer who became a boxer, and he just did something with Mike Tyson, and had a real moment with that. But anyway, that guy is a natural born marketer. Marketing is not necessarily something that you learn. I think that you're born with it, a nose, you've got a nose for it. And that guy has a nose for it. And I love watching what he does. But anyway, my son and I were watching, he had done this 30-minute short with ESPN or something about himself. And my son and I were watching that. And it was like about his transition into boxing from being an influencer and a YouTuber. And he had started off fighting MMA fighters. And so what he and his brother realized, they do all their marketing together. When his brother realized was like everyone was like just knocking him because he would never fight an actual boxer. He was only fighting MMA fighters. So the perception, the key objection in the marketplace was, oh, Jake Paul's not a real boxer because he won't fight boxers. He'll only fight MMA fighters. So in this little short, they like he's trying to figure out, okay, how do I get legitimacy as a boxer? And so when they realized that was the objection in the marketplace, he was like, that's the storyline. That's the storyline. And they owned the storyline. What they did was they recruited, I can't remember who it was, but he fought like a pretty big name boxer. And they did a whole pay-per-view thing about it, similar to what he just did with Mike Tyson. It was like a $40 million event. It was a huge windfall for him. It was so very, very successful. But what he did was he owned the objection. And so, okay, the objection in the marketplace is that I'm not a boxer because I won't fight boxers. Let's do a pay-per-view event where I fight a boxer. We're going to hit the objection on the head and then do a marketing campaign around it. So they did all this like cheap UGC content, like someone at the gym, like doing sit-ups, like Jake Paul sucks. He won't fight a boxer. They got all these people saying the objection. You suck. You won't fight a boxer. And then bam, okay, introducing the PayPal event on May 9th, I'm going to fight a boxer. It's a really good example. I actually recommend watching it. I can't remember the name of it, but you can find it. And it's just a really beautiful example of owning the objection and turning that into a very successful marketing campaign. So it is very, very important in this exercise to map out the key objections in the marketplace, because it might be marketing gold. So just to summarize that, again, you're going to go through this research process, come up with this whiteboard or deck or whatever of adjectives and themes, and then you're going to organize them into storylines, and there are buckets for each type of storyline. There's the brand why, the brand what, the customer benefits, the brand personality traits, and the key objections. Those are your buckets of storylines. That is your brand architecture. And then you formalize it into what I'm calling an architecture map. So you take your whys, you distill those down into one mission vision statement that's in the middle. And in the middle goes your mission vision statement, then your customer benefits. The reason that I don't include the brand what's in here is because, again, they tend to be the same as the customer benefits. They're kind of mirror images of each other. But again, the customer benefits might have an extra one that's like this intangible accrual of everything that you do, self-image or whatever. So what's tend to be a subset of customer benefits. And so just to keep this thing kind of simple, I'm not including the what. So you've got the why, which is your mission vision statement, your customer benefits, and then your personality traits. That's your that's it, guys. That's your brand architecture. That's your mission vision statement, your pillars, and this is what you're going to go do. You don't forget about the what's because, again, that's your charter of all you're doing, internally. But just to be concise, this is just your brand architecture map. And then I added this in again after cluing into the whole Think Different campaign, that the final step of your architecture definition is drilling it down to your tagline. What's the one thing and how do we say it, right? So this is just a process with you or your team or whatever to take kind of your architecture and drill it down into one little phrase, right? And again, you don't need to use it externally. It doesn't matter if you use it externally or not. I don't think it's just a forcing function to make yourselves really isolate the one core value, the soul of your company. So the other thing I want to say is that at Chief Detective, we test everything. It's like probably our core underlying organizing principle, which is the power of small scale tests. And we use Meta specifically as our kind of testing engine. There are a lot of ways to skin the cat. You could do focus groups. You could do all kinds of things. I remember when I read The 4 Hour Workweek, I loved that Tim Ferriss had used Google Ads to come up with the title for that book because he wanted to get customer voting input on it. And The 4 Hour Workweek 1, I'm sure if he had called that your guide to lifestyle design, it probably wouldn't have done as well. It's a very real thing that pictures and videos and words and phrases live on some spectrum of intrinsic performance value, right? Like certain words drive actions more than others, right? That's what we're doing all day long at Chief Detective is testing copy, testing headlines, testing pictures, testing videos, like trying to find things that have intrinsic performance value. And so I really am a big believer if there is time. And again, a lot of times we don't even have time, even though it's our core value. Like, okay, we're in a rush to get something into Sephora. We don't have time to test. We're just gonna have to guess and use our instincts. But best case scenario, there is time to test and you find some way to test kind of your storylines, because when you do the whys, the whats, the benefits, personality traits, objections, you're going to end up with a ton of storylines. You might have 20 storylines, right? And you can't say all of that. You've got to, pick a few of those to really build your marketing around, right? And so we like to use the ad engine to test those storylines against each other in different ways and come up with just, okay, these are the few that people really seem to respond to. Let's go with those, right? And so if you have time, and do it with your tagline too, because they're different. You might that one core value that you have, you could express that in infinite ways, right? So you might come up with 5 potential taglines and then test them and see what people respond to better. And that might, weigh in on what you eventually choose. And I will say, I don't think it's definitive, like you don't just take customer data and say, okay, we're doing that, right? There's room for instinct and passion and belief on your end. It just is an input that we like to consider because at the end of the day, we are marketing things on social channels and we have to win. Again, we have to win the transaction in the auction markets. So if we're kind of stuck between a few taglines and one of them has way higher intrinsic performance value from the testing, we're going to go with that one because it's just going to make our marketing more effective and our metrics better, right? So it's not the input, it's an input if you have time. Okay. All right. So just to recap, we've been through research. That's phase 1. We've been through the architecture definition, which is what we just went through, your storylines, your architecture map, your one thing. That's phase 2 is defining your architecture. And then phase 3 is implementing it and activating it, right? So how do we do that? Okay. The first thing, I don't want to overtalk this, but I would really just go through your storylines and look at everything you're doing as a business, look at your annual planning, where you're prioritizing things, where you're driving resourcing, and make sure that you're really delivering on what you say you're going to deliver, right? Just take that into account. Go look at yourselves now that you've mapped this all out so clearly and give yourself a scorecard like, okay, where do we need to improve, and weed that into your priorities. So that to me would be like step 1 is let's audit ourselves and all of our priorities against everything we just laid out and make sure we're actually doing it. But then there's the actual marketing, right? And this is basically what I would do, is try to come up with 3 to 4 things you're going to do to start to create this perception in the marketplace. So again, Apple's first step was creating a brand campaign. Let's do TV ad, let's do print ads around Think Different. Let's get a picture of Albert Einstein and put Think Different on it and run it in Time magazine. Let's do a manifesto ad with all this amazing video footage of people who've changed the world with this beautiful manifesto script that Chiat Day wrote, and run that as a TV ad, right? Those that was their first stop. That was what Steve Jobs intended to do in the first place. Is we haven't done a brand campaign in a long time. Let's do it. We're not going to talk about features. We're going to create this world, right? And so that I think really is a good first stop, is do a brand campaign, right? But then you've got to do a bunch of other stuff, and you want to look at everything you're doing as a company, the names of your products, right? Like, are you calling your sweaters like the slim cut crew neck sweater, or could you give that an emotional name that ties out to the world that you're creating? So, for example, in Jenny Kane, one of the top hero products is the cashmere cocoon cardigan, right? And that's an emotional name. So I would look at, what do you call your events? What do you call your podcast? What do you call your newsletter? Look at the named touch points of your company and think, could we tie in our world a little bit better on that, right? So I think what you're essentially doing is twofold. You're auditing all of your touch points, all of your existing marketing, and thinking, okay, and your product offerings and stuff like that. How can we infuse that with our brand, right? Whether it's the personality traits or, the why, whatever, right? Like just kind of think creatively about everything we're doing. How can we pull it in? How do we create a world in a more effective way, right? But then I think you're like, okay, the second work stream of this is what are we proactively then what's our marketing tactic to create awareness, reach, and to push the comment into the world of this perception, right? So have come up with this marketing checklist. It's not definitive at all, but it's what we use at Chief Detective to fuel our own internal brainstorms to help our clients think about, okay, what's the implementation plan for the brand now, right? Like, so again, brand advertising campaign. I'm just going to name a few of these. You guys can come up with your own checklist. This is just what we do, but brand advertising campaign, I think, would be first step. And then also just look at your paid ads. How do we insert brand into those, right? Doing a founder shoot, I think, would be a great first step. Let's get the founder saying this, right? Look at all the writing on your website, your about page, your descriptors on your PDP, your packaging, right? The one pager that you hand to partners describing who you are, your briefs that you're giving to influencers when they're going to shoot for you. Like, look at all of that stuff and bring it into this world, right? Like, refresh it with this new understanding and articulation of who you are and what you stand for. Think about the creators that you're recruiting. Like, are you doing scattershot creator and influencer recruitment, or do you want to actually profile and really go for some bigger ones who really represent who you stand for? Revisit that program. Your photography, of course, like I said, your named touch points, your product names, etc. Do you want to have an external tagline? If so, do you want to insert it in your packaging, or how do you want to get your tagline across? What's your organic social calendar look like? What kind of content are you creating? What's your email calendar? Are you doing affiliate articles? Are you planting articles out into Vogue and everything else with headlines that directly drive, your brand positioning? Are you creating content franchises? I love content franchises. That's just repetitive content concepts that you do like once a month or something like that, to create repetition around something. So are there content franchises that you could do that to represent this, events, collaborations, partnerships, a PR push? Like, what are you doing in the community and with charity? So that just to me is a quick checklist of like, okay, let's debate and have a competition of ideas around what we could do to push this thing into existence. And let's pick like 3 or 4 things that we think are going to be the biggest impact and just start with those, right? And I think the right attitude here is experimentation and try to do things with low stakes. You're trying to learn, because at the end of the day with marketing, you're going to find a few things that work, and then you're going to go do those into infinity, and so I think you're just trying to churn through a lot of ideas, figure out what works, and then pour water on those, right? So to me, you're trying to just experiment and have a really low stakes attitude towards this and just figure out what works. A really important concept that I use a lot is the difference between service content and pillar content. And I'm just going to spend 2 seconds on this. We can deep dive on this later, but just because I think it's important in brainstorming about brand, because we are all content companies now. Yes, you are a product company, but really you're a content company, because we all market on social at this point. We're all content forward. And what we have to, the muscle group, what we have to be really good at is developing content, right? And so in the development of that content, you now want to be aligned to this brand, right? And so to me, when you think about the content that you're developing across the course of the year, you have two types of content. One is service, which is it's your daily ho hum. You've got our calendars. We're just executing content day in, day out, newsletter, organic, social, paid. And I think with that, you just want to tighten the screws a little bit. You want to let it be kind of wild and adventuresome. I don't believe in sort of tyranny around brand. Like, okay, everything's suddenly going to look the same. I don't like that. I don't think that that's the word. I think that's yesteryear. We live in social now where everything's wild, wild west, power to the people. So let it be adventuresome and different and new ideas and innovative and trying things. But also make sure that the people developing your service content understand these storylines and can reinforce them, right? And then you want to have an EKG monitor over this so that if something works in your service content, you want to actually, maybe that's something you could turn into a content franchise and drive repetition around, right? But anyway, my point is that 4 times a year or something like that, or once a month, whatever the resources you can afford, do something bigger, right? And do it with the intention of being able to splice it out into service content over the course of months and possibly over the course of the whole year. So Goop does a good job of this. Like they do that Goop Health Summit, and then you'll see that content, that footage incorporated into organic social across, really the course of the year, right? They try to get key moments in those events and footage of it that is on brand and drives messaging and tone that they can splice into service content all year long. So I would just think about this and think, because this is really a good way to push brand through, is let's do a few big content moments across the course of the year that we're going to get permissioned footage and images and quotes from that we can drive into ads and organic social and emails all year long, right? So that's the concept of pillar content, is that you have these big moments that you really do construct, and invest in as big brand moments that are going to drive your messaging and your personality, et cetera, that you can pull from and splice into ads and stuff for a while. And it might be that you shoot the founder or you do an event or you do a collab, have a celebrity avatar, whatever. And if you're interested in this concept, or I'm not describing it particularly well, then I would recommend that you flip through this thing that Gary Vaynerchuk posted. He's another just absolute natural born killer in terms of marketing. That guy is a phenomenon and really worth learning from. And he has this great deck on his website that you should go check out, that explains the concept of pillar marketing. So go look at that. By the way, so Jake Paul, Gary V, natural born marketers, it is not just men. However, this is not gender biased, because the greatest natural born marketer of all time might be Kris Jenner, and a woman. She has created billions of dollars of value. I mean, she's just got a nose and a half for marketing. So another person really worth studying, I think. So, okay. So anyway, you're going to brainstorm with your team, figure out, it's a competition of ideas, allow that to be a competition of ideas. There's another thing you could farm out to executional teams. Like, okay, you guys are going to, you guys run events. I want here, you present your storylines and your architecture map to the whole team. You sell it to them the way that Steve Jobs did, right? Sell them the brand campaign. Use it as a way to get everybody, fired up about what you're doing, and then give them ownership over executionally. I don't believe in a committee coming up with brand, but I believe in a committee figuring out how to execute it, right? Give them, as David Ogilvy, one of my heroes, always says, or used to say, he's not alive anymore, but I've read a lot about this guy and he's awesome. And he says there are no statues to committees in the world, and he's right. And I think that brand does not come from committees. It probably comes from one or two people, but the execution of it is something that can be really, that you can give ownership to the team, and it helps everybody, really live it. So you could do one big brainstorm with, the key people, or farm it out to your executional teams, have them brainstorm and present back. At any rate, in some way, you want to create a competition of ideas. I really believe that more brains are better than one, and you want to seek thought partnership on this. Like, even just casually talking to friends, I'll just get the best ideas around brand executions. But try to be objective. Really try to push on the ideas of what's going to create impact. Don't waste your time on things that just are like art projects, And I learned an equation from my corporate finance professor at Stanford Business School that it's kind of stuck in my head. It wasn't exactly like this, but it was along these lines of like, how do you think objectively about something? How do you make good decisions, right? And so when we do things like this, I try to really push on it with like an objective scoring matrix of, okay, idea 1, idea 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 100, what's the percent chance it's going to work? So what's the risk kind of probability? How sure are we that that thing is going to deliver, right? What's the percent chance it's going to work? The next score is what's the impact level? So if it does work, how much is it going to drive revenue or awareness or however you're whatever you're trying to create, right? In terms of impact. So what's the impact level, the order of magnitude, and then how long is it going to take to execute, right? Those three things are really good variables to use to score these ideas, and then look at it all together, and then you can come, you're not debating on opinions, you're debating on scored assessments, and you decide what the best ideas are, and you're probably going to pick 3, 4 of these things and then attack them. So and again, experimental attitude, you only need a couple things to work, and then you're going to pour water on them, and um be poetic about this and relentless. Okay, recommended reading really quickly. This book is killer. And when I was trying to educate myself on brand marketing, because it's new to me. I'm a performance marketer. This is something I've really spent the last year and a half or so trying to get my hands around. And this book, I Googled on Amazon, or I searched on Amazon branding book, and this came up with really good reviews. And I've only honestly, admittedly, read 3 or 4 chapters of this, but those chapters were so clear and compelling that that was all I needed. This was very, very influential to me. And then I post facto realized that this guy's like a big stud, and he's like the guy in branding. And he actually, I think he was Scott Galloway's teacher, and they do a lot of work together. Anyway, this guy is a big stud, and I'm very indebted to this book. It was very influential to me, even in everything that I just described. And I really just couldn't recommend this enough. I think that you got to spend a second and flip through this book. And so just to summarize, I think that there are things in business and in life that are so clarifying, that they really can be the link that straightens out the whole chain and that just sets up a whole value chain. And I think that brand is one of those things. And I think that when you do this exercise correctly and you define brand in a way that is so clear and compelling, and you get all the way to the bottom of the pond, you are going to activate your company and create value in a way that is exponential versus what you were doing before. So I really believe that brand can be the link that straightens out the whole chain. And I think that it is the theme this year that markets are too saturated. If you're operating in a market that isn't saturated, I really commend you and encourage you not to brag about it to anybody, because you're really in the minority. Most of us are just duking it out in highly saturated markets. So I think brand differentiation is very important right now for scaling on paid media and getting the metrics that you need and your unit economics. I think it's very hard to compete right now without brand. So, and then I think it also, as we've talked about, is the lever that creates enterprise value. So kicking ass with both legs, I think, roots back down to brand. And then again, you're trying to make your marketing obvious. And so if you're sitting around thinking we're not sure what to do, to me, I would go back to the drawing board on brand. It drives preference in the marketplace. It drives customer loyalty, right? It drives enterprise value, and it gets rid of that sinking feeling that you're buying transactions and not creating a brand, right? And of course it activates your customer, but it also activates you. It's the fire underneath the hot air balloon that's going to make your whole team lift up. And so, and then of course, that we are going to be absolute ballers and try to create something that cannot be competed with. That is the noble, aggressive goal of dominance, category dominance, that you're going to go for with creating this brand, something that cannot be competed with, pure defensibility. You're going to take it all the way to the bottom. Purpose whispers, you're going to grab it, right? Go all the way to the bottom, get to the heart of it, get to the right answer. Don't do this exercise and come up short. Get to the right answer, and then you're going to attack. And remember, we're trying to live at that intersection of the side of humanity that makes you want to be a poet and not a banker is going to come from poetry, right? It's a spiritual exercise, but then you're turning on your left brain and you're going to be an animal and savage, and you're going to attack and dominate your category. So live at that intersection. And the last thing I would say is that I really believe that interesting people create interesting things. And back to the Peggy Noonan thing, do not do what is expected, do what is interesting and true. So I wish you interestingness, I wish you soul, I wish you spirituality, I wish you humanity, I wish you deep understanding and passion for your customers. And then I wish you savagery and aggression and business shrewdness and acumen and prioritization and attack. So this is so fun. It is so profound, the impact this can have. I hope that this has been helpful, something I'm totally obsessed with these days, and I really wish you luck. So good luck, guys. I'm going to go ski with my kids and hope you have a good one.